You guys look really comfy together.
Yeah.
It's like shoulder to shoulder. How's it going, everybody? You guys hard at work this afternoon? This is a pretty awesome space. Again, thanks to everybody who put this together. I don't know all their names, but you can tell me afterwards. The Stag Mob, this is like a really cool facility. I think this is awesome. And the bathroom is great, the kitchen's great, the space is great. So thank you guys for all that. I'm really excited to do this because I have two little kids, and when the App Store first hit, when apps first started coming out, I remember that Tap was like one of the first games that we, downloaded and played incessantly. And we're also big Nine Inch Nails fans, and so it's like after each release, it was just like an automatic download, and it was really one of those things that was immediately accessible, instantly showed you the power of the platform, and was something that you couldn't have done on another platform before. And I'm a old Palm OS user, and go back, well, I still got my Seiko UC3000 watch, so that's how long I've been playing games on mobile platforms. Anyway, without further ado, I want to have all these guys introduce themselves and say what they're doing now. You guys ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll just start talking about what it was like then, and I really want to see, how things have sort of progressed. You've all kind of gone to do different stuff now, and so I think it's interesting to look back on what things were like then and what things are like now. It was a frontier back then, and it's largely been settled at this point. And so I think that still has a lot of lessons for you guys to learn, because there's still a huge amount of potential out there. I mean, California at one time was a frontier as well, and it's largely been settled, but there's still a ton of opportunity. And so that's probably a good place to start with that. So I'm going to start off here.
Hey, I'm Tristan. And back when I was at Tapulous, I worked on Twinkle. That was kind of my little project there. And nowadays, I helped co-found Square, and I'm still a developer there, building their register app.
I'm Nate True. I originally created Tap Revolution that got bought and changed into Tap Revenge by Tapulous. Right now, I'm working with Kyle on... Did that just work? Check. There it goes. Okay. Right now, I'm working with Kyle on sort of getting rid of the concept of a page for children's books and graphic novels. He'll go into that.
Hi, I'm Kyle. I got side roped into this. These guys were the first wave, and then as they were slowly waving out, I just kind of was like, oh, okay, see ya. So I worked on Tap Dance, did a lot of the UI and menu systems. Did a lot of work with a great guy named Brian Bell. And now I am the CEO of Monster Costume, working with Nate. On interactive media, such as children's books and graphic novels and the like, and still tinkering, I guess, around in random applications.
And of course, I'm Mike Lee. Most of you got to hear an hour of my ranting just an hour ago. I was a co-founder of Tapulous and chief architect, and I hired Tristan. And Nate actually preceded me in the company because he was acquired by the preceding company. And of course, Kyle succeeded me. After that, I started another game company right as the economy was collapsing. After that, I worked at Apple. After that, I started Appsterdam, which of course you are at least slightly familiar with. And now I'm CEO of a new company making educational games in Amsterdam.
So I want to go round robin again real quick, and I want to ask you guys specifically, when you first started out developing for iOS, of course at the time iPhone OS, what did you come to the table with? I mean, did you conceive, first of all, that this would be as big as it was? And second, what was different about this than the development that you had done before?
I could tell immediately. The first thing I thought when I saw Steve Jobs announce it was that we've never really had a computer you could easily use that had the internet from anywhere. And I just knew that would change most everything that we kind of use these days. What I didn't foresee then was that mobile or multi-touch would change how we use computers so much. But I think more than anything, it changed how we feel about computers we use now. And to the latter part of your question, what were you saying?
Well, what was different?
What was different? I think I pretty much summed it up. I thought it was going to basically take over the world. I mean, I didn't think it was going to do it that fast, but that's what surprised me.
When I got into iPhone OS, a friend of mine just sort of convinced me to get an iPhone, and I started playing with it. I never really thought about what the consequences of the platform would be. I just wanted to make something cool, put it out there, and possibly move on, but it caught on and just sort of rode the wave, I guess. And I had no clue that there was actually an entire other platform with Objective-C on it that I actually could have studied. Mike can totally tell you that I was horrible at Objective-C when Tap Revolution came out. Awful. I think one source file, no release calls. So yeah, it was terrible.
I actually remember that source file. I've had long discussions with that source file. It was, I remember at one point this time I was looking at it and going, dude, okay, all good. Yeah, so I actually was a developer at Microsoft at the time when the iPhone was announced. And I like to state that the iPhone was announced, and then 2 months later I left Microsoft. Thank you. Actually, then I worked for Getty Images, and right around the time that the iPhone SDK was announced, I immediately saw the potential. I mean, it wasn't even a question of, oh, you know, will we have some applications? It was like, dude, this is unnecessarily huge. And one of the things I appreciated about it was that I had the opportunity to actually take, you know, just 2 weeks essentially of vacation to just focus on the iPhone SDK the day that was announced. I just read every header file, I read the entire change log. I just went through everything, you know, over the course of my own break. What was so different about iPhone development versus, well, you know, C# is, one, it's actually fun. Like, there's something very intuitive about how the framework was made. And that's one of the things I really appreciated about it was it's very rare that you get a chance to be a part of a platform that really has the foresight to take the framework and really make sure that they thought of everything to make sure that that framework represents the platform to its best. I think that that's exactly what Cocoa Touch did. And it's, or UIKit at this point, that's what it was originally called. And I definitely think that that has helped out tremendously, not only for ease of use development, but also just the whole process for how developers are able to quickly prototype, create, you know, finish by implementation, and then ship a product. So absolutely day and night situation for me as a developer.
You know, my own career was kind of a perfect storm when it came to this iPhone stuff because, you know, I've been a dude, you know, working labor and stuff like that, and then I started working with this guy, Will Shipley, and I basically kind of been living in his basement and being his protege for 2 years when the iPhone came out. Learning how to program on the Mac, the iPhone came out, I immediately changed my Twitter status to religion iPhone. You know, it was like, when it came out, it was just like, I knew it. I knew that it was going to be huge. I wrote a huge blog entry at the time. I told all my friends, like, there's going to be a gold rush. I'm moving to California. Like, I'm going to be a part of this. This is as big as the Mac. Like, all of that stuff. You know, the last year of my time with Shipley was basically this constant fight between me wanting to work on iPhone stuff and him not wanting me to work on iPhone stuff because we're supposed to be working on Mac stuff. And you know, my coworker Lucas Newman, for example, wrote the first ever iPhone game for Jailbreak. You know, he was big into that stuff, and so like I really had kind of my thumb in the ass of the early iPhone stuff, and I really wanted to grab a hold of it, and it was kind of just this big thing. And so, you know, I kind of sacrificed everything in my life to work with Shipley and to get onto the Mac, and so it was kind of like, all right, let's do it all again. And I moved to California, you know, joined there was a company called GoGo Apps. Basically, it was a bunch of jailbreak software that had been purchased by these guys. And when I joined the company and we started turning it over into, you know, converting it all over to the SDK, then it became Tapulous. And you know, the really funny thing for me and all of this stuff is that I really did not think very highly of my own abilities at this point. And the reason for that was because, I mean, one thing you have to understand is that in my life, even though I've had like 100 jobs, like none of those jobs have ever followed, right? I've never done that thing, or I had never done that thing where you start a job, you work that job, and then you leave that job for like a bigger and better job. Like every job change for me was a career change. And so when I got to the end of my employment with Shipley, like I kind of like sincerely felt that that was it for me. That my beautiful dream of being a programmer for a living had come to an end. And as much as I love the iPhone, I really didn't think that, I mean, you know, I loved it, but I just didn't think that I had what it took. You know, I didn't think I was ready. You know, I felt like this Shaolin monk that was sent down from the mountain to engage in some strife, really not feeling like I had ever, you know, grasped the stone from my master's hand kind of thing. And, you know, I was very much like, I was not interested in being in charge. You know, I only agreed to join the company as a co-founder because I spent, you know, 3 years arguing with Will about decisions he was making in Delicious Library, and I was tired of being told I'm the boss by somebody else who was making a decision I didn't agree with. Which is not to say that Shipley was wrong, just that I disagreed with it and it was frustrating. But I still didn't want to be the boss, but I wanted to have some kind of power so that I could make sure that things just didn't go to shit. But I really didn't want to be, I didn't want to be a C-level executive or anything like that. But then a couple of people, Guy English in particular, and who would be my first hire, even before Tristan, because he was a remote hire. Tristan was my first in-person hire. And Will Shipley as well, you know, they basically said, if you're not the boss, then who is going to be the boss? And how are your engineers going to be protected if you're not the one protecting them? So it's kind of like, okay, I'll be the boss, but only until I can find somebody who's better at this than I am, which I didn't manage to do when I was there, but we did manage to ship some stuff, so I guess it worked out okay.
So if you're waiting for the colorful metaphor from Mike Lee, you can scratch that off your bingo cards right now. Thumb up the ass of the iPhone. I like that. Or the dock, I guess, the dock port, which would be the ass. Something that struck me as you guys are talking about this is that all of you were developers before, right? Different backgrounds and whatnot. And I'm interested how iPhone development or iOS development has shifted your perspective on development, if at all. I mean, you know, maybe it's just reinforced the same practices and you know, things that you did before, or maybe it's sort of giving you a fresh outlook on development.
If there's one thing I can think that iOS development has really changed since before, it'd be that you really have to care about things you didn't have to in the past. When you go from this really powerful, hungry machine with a 500 watt power supply and just near infinite resources, and you switch to this embedded device with an ARM chip and hardly any RAM, you take for granted all the shit you did that was just woefully inefficient. So, I mean, if there's anything that really changed, I'd say it's that. But, so I didn't get a chance to go to my background. My background was in Mac before I got into iOS. So for me, it was just kind of a nice little natural segue. I already really knew frameworks for the most part and knew how to write Objective-C and all that. Pretty much everything still applied. It was mostly just coming to terms with the new interaction model, how that changes things, how it changes the type of apps you want to write, how it changes how they behave. I feel like that's a really big part of what the move from traditional programming and moving to iOS changed. But kind of go back to what Kyle was saying, I really, really enjoyed how Apple cleaned up the framework substantially. if you had to do Mac programming and you did anything with NS Table View and NSL, and kind of going over the UI kit way of doing it was just like a breath of fresh air. It all just made about 10 times more sense, and it made your life about 10 times easier. And so programming iOS in the early days was just pure bliss compared to what you used to do on the Mac. Other than that, it felt mostly like I was at home.
I did a lot of programming on a range of things, server side, Visual Basic, even programming these little tiny chips. This one's powering my watch. The biggest transition for me was actually just the fact that iPhone programming became my job. And I went from being a terrible iPhone programmer that just managed to make something that luckily caught on to someone who's actually a professional iPhone programmer. Thanks to Mike Lee, Kyle Kinkade, Jessica Kahn isn't here, but Kyle told me that these two words go together, and I had no clue, or the words design patterns. I had no idea what those meant. And apparently they're structures to code, so I didn't used to have that essentially that professional transformation to where I'm actually a professional coder now, and not just a code hacker with a lucky streak.
Okay, actually, Nate really is a very good developer. Just in case everyone's like, wow, okay, how did he stumble into this? He didn't actually so much stumble as he did like this really awesome, like awkward step at first, and then caught himself and started walking. It wasn't so much of like an ouch moment as it was like you have our attention. So for me, I actually did some Mac development before I did iPhone development. When I was working at Microsoft, I was secretly working on my own Mac application because I had the idea of being an indie developer even then. I was like, is there a better world outside there? So, you know, I'm going to echo Tristan's words about breath of fresh air. It was taking the bittersweet moment of development, the sweetness of how Mac development can be super, super easy, and the bitterness of how it can not be at times. And just removing the bitter part, it was just like, oh man, yeah, this is how it should always have been. That actually wasn't really the biggest transition for me. The biggest transition for me was how I could constantly have to rethink how I was doing interaction design. Because with the iPhone, you know, on the desktop, you know, that was our only paradigm, you know, was a mouse and keyboard. And then when you go to the iPhone, you're like, well, I'll just add a button. And you're like, I'm so smart. And then you look at your design, you go, maybe you do a little swipe here, and you realize, oh, okay, I have to come up with a new whole way of design paradigming in this. Push that even further, you know, you get a design that you're pretty happy with, and you're high-fiving yourself, and then you look at, you know, you look at Tweety, you know, when that comes out, and you're just like, oh gosh, you know, it just feels like it's kind of like you're trying to dig a well, and you're trying to keep hitting water, and you think that there's going to be a bottom, but there really isn't. You're just going to find lava at some point. It just keeps going and going and going of new ways to innovate on this platform in terms of interaction design. And I think that that's something that we've all had to go through, was, you know, saying, okay, you know, I think I have a great user experience here, and you constantly find yourself having to tweak it because you're always finding that extra glimmer of something that could be really, really incredible. And that's something that you don't really find actually on any other type of platform. So.
Yeah, you know, I'm a lot like a lot of these guys. I had a lot of experience on a lot of different kind of platforms, and I really wanted to get to the Mac because to me the Mac was the end-all and be-all, and it was the end-all and be-all before iOS came out. Everything that these guys have said is true. I mean, the change of the frameworks, getting used to doing everything on that smaller device, having to think about memory management and stuff like that, all of a sudden again, was a huge shift. I think for a lot of people, you know, even me, who was already a professional Mac programmer at the time, When the iPhone came out, it was like, you know, it was like I dated girls before, but then I finally met the one. You know what I mean? And it was just like, it was just one of these things where it's just something you feel innately, where it's like, this is something that I can definitely see dedicating the rest of my life to. And then, I mean, you know, everything you say is true as well. I mean, all of this stuff. But I think that all of this stuff on the tree, it almost even underestimates the change that the iPhone brought. I mean, it changed everything. You know, it changed fundamentally the paradigm that we used to think about software. You know, before software was something that the computer did, now software is something that the computer is. You know, this is a lot more like primitive nanomachinery than it is like advanced software. You know, we're transforming these entire devices. We're not just doing something on a virtual desktop. We actually have control of physical space on a real desktop, and we're using this, you know, this artifice to actually make this device into something else, a book that turns into a piano, as I like to say. But like the changes to the community, for example, you know, why I became a Mac programmer ultimately, why I settled on the Mac after spending years wandering through the desert of many other platforms, was ultimately the community. You know, when I was on Java, for example, I would ask for help from the Java community, and the Java community would tell me to fuck myself. You know, because they really didn't need the competition for contracts, and they didn't need the prices being driven down by having additional programmers brought in. But when it was, you know, the Mac and Objective-C, it was like, you want to program in Objective-C? Are you kidding me? I love you. Like, let me teach you everything. You know? But when the iPhone came out, all of a sudden there was money in it, and that changed everything. The community suddenly began to separate, and there was this whole us versus them mentality, even on our own platform. I mean, do you remember when we thought fart apps were like the worst thing in the world, and they were going to destroy not just our platform, but software? And now it's like, I feel like, you know, an old person who sees a whoopee cushion and declares it to be the end of humanity, you know? And it's like, well, what were we so upset about? Like, really, fart apps were the worst thing in the world? I mean, come on. You know, but you know, we didn't know what this thing was going to be. It was something that we were all building, and I think for a lot of us, it was a real personal thing. You know.
Well, thank you. Actually, you know, I've been thinking about that for a very long time, and one of the things that for me that kind of hit to that chord was that before the iPhone, it was a very tight-knit community. You know, you could in Seattle we had something called the Seattle Excoders. And you could go there any point in time, sit down, have a drink with someone, get handed a lemur drunkenly, and you know, just be part of that community. And when the money hit, you know, there was a lot of different developers who came in, and you know, rightfully so. It's a great platform. It's a great environment. It's a great business. Please come in and enjoy. I think the difference was kind of almost this cultural shock value transition. As the community went from tight-knit to like everyone bumping elbows with each other, like, hello, who are you? You know, it was that kind of moment for it. And we weren't used to fart apps. You know, we weren't. You know, we were too busy like handshaking each other going, oh, good job, sir, fine UI. And then, you know, that kind of jumped in. And that was one of the things that I think the community, to be quite frankly, failed on. I think that there was an opportunity for us to actually really embrace people, you know, as the community was growing, and it turned. Basically, the community turned into a bunch of elitist assholes. I mean, that really is the truth. I know a couple of people who are still extremely elitist, extremely. Childlike in their mentality of how they're not willing to move on and work, and I think that ultimately is more damaging than anything else. That being said, I think that communities like Appsterdammers or Indie Dev Lab might be something that, you know, we hope to change with that. But absolutely, I think that's something that was an unintended consequence, was this kind of failure for us to communicate that resulted in an opportunity, you know, that we could have had a fantastic way to actually enrich the group with the sheer number of people and have that great mentality, and I think we lost that.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly exactly what I was driving at. I mean, for me, right after the iPhone came out and the economy collapsed, I ended up going to Apple working in worldwide developer relations. And boy, that was, I mean, I loved WWDR. I had an office at 3 Infinite Loop. I mean, it was like a fantasy job and a fantasy life, but at the same time, like, I was so disappointed in the community. I was so disappointed in the elitism. I was so disappointed in just the grousing about everything Apple was doing. And it was like, we'd all been on this platform because we believed in it. And now that we were actually winning, we were all turning on the platform. And I really just felt like, it's like, guys, you've invested so much in this and you're not going to give this company the benefit of the doubt. I mean, come on, right? This thing is just starting. To me, that by the time we got to kind of the end of 08, it was really a nadir of the community. And I really became very disillusioned and very depressed about the whole thing. And I finally came to understand, there was this, again, to get into the Buddhism again, there was this old Buddhist saying that had always confused me that I finally understood. And that saying was that if you meet the Buddha on the side of the road, you should kill the Buddha because the true Buddha lives only in your heart. And I understood this because I realized that the community had become a Buddha for me in that sense. Like I had begun to revere the community to the point where it really meant more to me than it should have, basically. And when I came to see that the community could in fact be just as nasty as any other community, that was me killing the Buddha. That was me becoming, having my eyes opened to the complexity of the real world. And a lot of Appsterdam was born out of seeing the community after reaching just really this low point come back around and start supporting each other again, and seeing people come together and seeing these embers of the colleagueship that we had on the Mac that had been in such danger of being snuffed out by iOS finally start to catch this wet wood again and start to turn things around, and that kind of openness and acceptance and cooperation that really is what made me fall in love with the community began to come back. And that's when I decided that it was again something worth contributing to. Because I mean, the company that I had right after Tapulous United Lemur it was basically Appsterdam as a for-profit company. It was a bit of an amateurish first attempt, certainly, but that was the basic idea, was to serve the community. And so then after that, then feeling very betrayed by the community. I mean, it was very hard, but I came back, and I'm very glad that it did, because I genuinely believe that the community that we were so close to losing, that we finally come to understand, is not something that was granted to us, but something that we have to actively work to create. I think it's not just the future of what we do, I think it's the future of capitalism, I think it's the future of business. I think this idea of being cooperative and working toward a common good, even as we fulfill our selfishness, that's the only chance we have.
I think that points out a good note. Something that I've been hit by a few times at TUA, we get a lot of pitches, and everyone's always looking for an angle, right? And one of the most interesting to me is when young kids, they're always trying to out-young each other or whatever. I was born with an iPhone and I had an app already ready. It was a fart app, by the way. And so I'm curious, because these are people who are coming through and their first language is Objective-C,
That's awesome.
And which is awesome, but I'm wondering how there's no one in here that looks like they're 13 or under. So I'm wondering what you guys think in terms of fostering, young developers. And any thoughts on that, because I think that that's a really powerful force that I hadn't seen for a long time. And keep in mind, I was programming H-line, V-line back in the 80s in AppleSoft Basic, so I think it's important that we support these kids.
There's a lot of things that I wish Apple would do to make it easier to get into iPhone programming, or just programming for their devices in general. One of them is I just feel like the entire environment is this gigantic cliff that you have to climb up before you can really start to get somewhere productive. It does not strike me as a easy learning curve, because you've got the mountain of C to figure out, which can be pretty complicated. And they're making baby steps towards making it easier with things like Arc, but Arc is still so confusing to me, considering that they added like a dozen keywords just to handle all the exceptions. It doesn't feel like it made it simpler to me. It feels like it feels like it tried to hide the complexity, and in turn, it's going to make people not understand what's going on under the hood more than I think it's going to help them stop everything they didn't have to before. So I feel like a large part of that would be to honestly move eventually away from Objective-C. That might be contentious with a lot of people, but I feel like that, if there ever was something to encourage people to get more into iPhone programming at a really young age, it would be to not require people to understand the inner workings of the computer just to be able to write an application. You don't have to, and I've seen plenty of people who have no idea and just jump right in and start writing code, but it doesn't change the fact that it still takes some years before they get good at it and stop making the basic mistakes. So, yeah, short of upgrading to a modern environment instead of patchworking the same kind of old environment for years and years, I don't know where they're going to go with that. What got me into programming was viewing the source code in all my pages. Started wondering how the hell people did a lot of cool stuff, and found the view source page. Kind of opened up a whole new world to me. Found out you could do a lot of things just by copying and pasting, and eventually the copying and pasting really makes sense. And just kind of went from there. Learned Visual Basic on my own, and eventually graduated on to learning Java in a full setting in class. C was a later thing, and Objective-C was an even later thing. But my tutorial is still to this day one of the most popular on the web for Objective-C. And I wrote that back in college with the actual intent. I was learning the language, and this was my, well, I want to give back to the community, so I want to write a tutorial as I'm learning it from my perspective. And to this day, nobody's really, I think, made one quite in the same vein, which is under the assumption that you already know how to code, but you don't know what's different about Objective-C compared to programming in existing environments. And I still think that's actually the right approach to go, because Objective-C's legacy is so old that to really understand everything before Objective-C is a whole other book, literally and figuratively, which I linked to on the page.
Personally, I believe that having Objective-C as the first language is just fine. I feel like the biggest things in learning to program are, number one, being passionate about making something that you'll be proud of. So if you want to learn how to program for the iPhone, and you take a class on Java, you're not going to get there. You're not going to have the passion, and you're not going to want to learn. In addition to that, I believe that, oh, I was going to say something right there. Languages can be made easier or more difficult to learn, more complicated or anything, but I feel like the single biggest thing to learn in programming is making that intuitive leap from solving your problems yourself to teaching a computer to solve those problems for you. That once you learn how to do that in any language, those skills transfer rather readily, just learning the new syntax and keywords of a new language. So I would definitely recommend Objective-C as the first language, just because of what you can make with it, not necessarily because it's easy to learn. Because programming is not easy to learn. It just isn't.
How did you get into it?
It was way back when. I was something like 7 years old. It was QBasic on a little green-screened 8088. And it was there on the computer. I opened it up. It was an empty editor that looked like a text editor, and I had no clue what it was. And just looked in the documentation. My parents didn't know anything about programming. I didn't have anyone to ask, but there was documentation there, and I started playing with it. That was really it.
I think I want to preface my mini rant here with the fact that I actually have an Objective-C tattoo on my right arm. Right, there it is. So here's the idea, is that those are brackets, right? You fill in the code. I'm left-handed, so I can write code on my arm and fill in the blanks. Come on. All right. Anyways, I'm so clever. No, I do it when I'm drunk. That's actually how I get beer. So yeah, no, I think Objective-C leaving Apple not good. I don't believe it's going to happen. I think it's going to be around for quite a while. People learning Objective-C in the beginning, I would recommend against. I started learning QBasic back in the day, and I started QBasic because I wanted to make a game, or I wanted to make some app, right? I didn't want to learn it because I wanted to make money, or I didn't want to learn it because programming is our cool. I just wanted to make a small application. My application was my first app was like, all right, I'll make a virtual reality pet, just because that was the fad at the time. And then I realized I wasn't that good of a programmer yet, so I made a virtual reality pet rock. And I still actually have the code for my first little virtual reality pet rock. And there's like a weird ritual that once a year I'll look at the app, I'll open up a QBasic emulator and I'll be like, sweet, I remember making this. And I'm like, yeah, I should open source it. And I just release it and be like, just for fun. And show it to my friends. And then I read the code. And then I close the file, put it away, and think about it next year. I think grab any language. I echo Nate's sentiments that if you want to learn something on a very specific platform, go ahead and learn it on that platform, because that's what you're passionate in, that's what you want to do. You don't want to code because you think entering characters into an IDE is so awesome. You want to code because you want to see the end result. So go get that end result. Absolutely. But don't stop at one language. When you talk to people who are multilingual, people who have 8 or 9 languages, like actual talking languages as opposed to nerd languages, they say to you, after the first one or after the first 3 languages you learn, it just becomes so easy, because you learn more of the more overall concepts of how a language is constructed verbally. And I believe that the more that you learn programming languages, the easier it gets for that too. So really, it's not a question of, what language should I learn first or what should we be teaching. It's more, I think, apt to how exactly do you want to contribute. And once you're able to, say, I want to go and focus on contributing that, or I want to go focus on doing this, then set that goal, look at every single hurdle, and go over them one by one until you get there.
Yeah, it's really true what Kyle says about language, and it even goes further than that. I mean, there's science now that demonstrates that the words that you know, the language that you speak, it actually determines the way that you're able to think, and that you actually can't think about things you don't have words for. There are some cultures, for example, that, don't have a different word for blue and green. And so if you show people from that culture blue and green, they really, literally cannot see the difference between them, because their brains have just not been segregated in that way. There are experiments with rats and human children, which actually map the development of the ability to determine, for example, something relative to a blue wall. If you don't have the concepts in your vocabulary for blue and wall, then you can't do anything relative to a blue wall. You can't even see a blue wall because of how the brain works. So learning a lot of languages is great, because then you are able to overcome the limitations and assumptions of an individual language and get closer to the core truth that is really at the center of all of this stuff. And that, for me, is really what's more interesting. It's the core truth. I mean, I love Objective-C as a language. I mean, I don't have the tattoo, but I did, when I used to live here, I had a car, and that car had a license plate, AltWWDC. It's not as cool as a tattoo, but, it is faster than a tattoo, I guess. It has a passenger seat, which is more than you can say for a tattoo, although, but at the same time, I mean, like, Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, if you will, what kind of paint did he use, right? I assume it's oil paint. I don't actually know, even though the Van Gogh Museum is my favorite museum in Amsterdam. I definitely don't know the kind of paint he started with. I don't think anybody cares. And, back then it was painters and we used paint. Now it's apps and we use code. What language is it? Who gives a shit? Like, it really doesn't matter. Nobody ever looked at this and said, oh, is that Objective-C? Very nice. Like, nobody cares, right? The reason why I learned Objective-C is because I wanted to program for the Mac. And I wanted to program for the Mac using Java and BBEdit because I knew how to use Java and BBEdit. And then, you know, I had a conversation with Dave Carvalho, who works for the program office at Apple. And I'm like, I love this stuff. Like, how can I get into it? How can I get better at it? How can I come work in Apple? And he's like, you're going to have to give up this Java stuff. Like, you know, nothing against Java. It's just that if you're going to learn to do something, you have to learn to do it the way it's done, or else it's just going to be hard for you. And that was one of those hard lessons. You know, and I can talk all day about why I think Objective-C is a great language to learn. I mean, I like it because it focuses less on what the computer is doing and more on what the user is meant to be doing, or the features of the app. It's very descriptive in that sense. But, you know, honestly, for me, like, the important thing when we talk about future generations, like, a program, the act of programming, it's really all about state and managing state, and you know, it's not about, I mean, ones are ones and zeros are zeros, it's about how they're put together, you know, it's just like with chemistry. You know, it's that information that really makes the computer a computer, and the functions to change that information, to transform it in given ways. And I mean, that is a description of the universe. The whole universe is a state machine. It's a self-programming state machine because we're part of the universe, and we program it when we change it, when we do the things that we do. And I think it's important to teach kids that they can program not just their computers, but the computer that we're all a part of. We tend to develop a resentment of youth. We tend to think of ourselves as hardcore, self-taught motherfuckers, and these kids today as having it so easy and not even understanding. And the reality is we had it easy, and they have it hard, you know. And they have it easy and we had it hard. I mean, it's hard, it's easy, you have the hand that you're dealt. At the end of the day, if we're to be successful as a species, if we're to be successful as a planet, you know, it's important to understand that the next generation is supposed to go farther. The next generation is supposed to start a little bit ahead. Like, if the next generation goes 10% farther than our generation did, that means the value of our generation was 10% of the next generation. I mean, if they can start 400 times ahead of where we had to start, then that means that the value of our generation was 400 times. So, yeah, they should have it easy. They should have it better than us. They shouldn't have to learn the things that we had to learn. They shouldn't have to suffer the way that we had to suffer, because they have their own things to learn and their own ways to suffer that we ourselves could never imagine, because we didn't get that far. But they got that far because of us, the same way that we got as far as we did because of the people who came before. And all of us who think that we're self-taught are deluding ourselves. I mean, even those of us who, you know, sold everything and strapped a computer to our backs and, you know, sat there with a book teaching ourselves something that we had nobody to ask a question for, we can't look at history. We can't look at the Alan Turings of the world. We can't look at the sacrifices made to build the things that we're able to mess with and delude ourselves into thinking that we came from nothing. Like, we stand on the shoulders of giants just as we offer our shoulders to be stood upon.
Just to let you guys know, if you had experiments on small children on your bingo card for Mike Lee, you can please mark that off now.
I'm curious, now we're going to shift a little bit into some more of the practical type things that you guys learned and are probably still learning, and talking about business and whatnot. I'm curious how many out there, though, iOS more or less was kind of your first platform. Anybody? Just a couple people. How many of you would describe yourselves more programmers than designers? Okay. That's probably majority. So what I'm curious about, because I do see young people, it's one thing to learn development. That's something you can say, you add 1 + 1, it should equal 2. Design is a little bit more finicky. I think that one thing that is a hallmark of everyone up here is that the work that you have continued to do has been marked by incredible design. And I will say that by looking at your work and admiring all of your work in that regard. I don't open up the source code and look at it, so I don't know, it could be a mess in there. But definitely I think of design, and that's obviously a big part of the human equation. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on sort of balancing that equation of the development and the design. And there's a lot of discussion as to which part of that, is it 50-50, is it whatever, but how do you personally manage those two sort of sides of the brain?
That's a great question. In my experience, it'd be great if every engineer could be an excellent designer. I wish every developer I know could edit Photoshop just as well as Louis Mantilla or Robert Anderson or all the people I've worked with who are just absolutely amazing. And then at the same time, I wish they could bust out Objective-C and write the app right alongside me and vice versa. Wish I could do what they do. In my experience, though, the amount of people who actually can do both of those things is extraordinarily rare. I mean, they're just geniuses. I don't even know what to say other than they're just geniuses. Because it's almost like you have these two opposing things in your mind where you have to balance like the imprecise, fuzzy human logic with the exacting, precise like memory buffer sizes and integer, sizes and just crazy things that you're coming at from a completely different perspective. Balancing that precision with the imprecision is why it's such a clear kind of dividing line, I think, between the professions and between kind of why we like to pass that effort off to the other side and vice versa. But there's a gap that bridges them, and that gap is interaction design. And I think it's absolutely critical that anybody who's building software from the engineering side should be a good interaction designer. Doesn't mean you need to have gone to classes and taken it formally. Doesn't mean you need to call yourself an interaction designer and do mock-ups and all that crap. It just means you need to understand when they give you a design, how it actually should work. Because they'll never be able to cover every single case. They'll never be able to account for all the things that as an engineer you have to account for, like network errors or performance issues or platform constraints, shit like that. So it's, to me, been the one biggest piece of my career that I realized early on, or late on actually, rather, in college, that I did not know. And I tried everything in my power to fix that with lots of basically just brute force. Figuring it out, doing it, failing, until it started to make sense, and until you started to get confidence in your intuition. And that really, I think, is what it comes down to. But I would say that it's great to go after both. Try to do both. Try to be, even if you're an engineer, try to get into some Photoshop tutorials and figure it out. It's actually not as scary as you think. I think Photoshop actually crashes less these days than Xcode, so you might find it's actually pretty enjoyable. In the same perspective, if you're a designer, don't be scared of code. HTML and JavaScript is very easy. You won't crash your computer. You can hit a couple buttons and preview it and play with it. There's nothing wrong with getting into programming, and you can take your ideas and make them a reality without a whole lot of effort. Getting deep down into the code side, you might want to be a genius.
I don't have much to say about the actual visual design of things. I don't do much of that besides exporting assets out of Photoshop, but I do want to say that the advent of iPhone and touch OSs has really improved the ability of a simple developer to make something that's compelling to use, simply because iOS itself has increased the number of controls and actions and just concepts in general that mimic the real world. So where before you would put a button that did something, that isn't normally attached to a button, like changing a font size or something like that. Now there are things like, the artist will tell me when I'm implementing something, make this look like a ball hanging on a string, and let them be able to pull it. Or make it a canvas that they can just push as if it's floating on rails. And simply because they can describe the interaction to me in such a simple physical way, I, as a developer, even though I'm not good at software UI design, can know whether or not it's intuitive simply by virtue of the fact that I manipulate physical objects in the real world and know how they move. And so it actually, I feel like the TouchOS stuff has made it a lot easier, where before you had to come up with something that was intuitive, but in a completely different way, just like hitting Control X is always cut for the clipboard or Command X, it's only intuitive because you know that's what it's supposed to be. It's not intuitive in any other sense, such as picking up scissors and cutting something. Where, I mean, we don't have that in iOS now, but as metaphors get closer and closer to the physical world, it becomes a lot easier to make something that's intuitive and easy to work with.
I think that Tristan's absolutely correct that it's very rare to find someone who understands good design and someone who understands core concepts of development. And even if you find that person, they're not going to be perfect in both. I think that what is really interesting, there's a model that I really love from Pixar. And one of the things that Pixar does is that their idea is that the technology challenges the art, and art challenges technology. That's a statement that Pixar says all the time, and you view it a lot as, oh, okay, they're just being PR in interviews, right? But no, they really got a dang good point, actually. You know, they can wave that truth around, and it just doesn't seem like people realize it. I think that for the good hybrid mutant designer developer person that exists, I would love to have a superhuman developer and a superhuman designer. As a matter of fact, I actually almost want to have some of the most technologically ignorant designers out there. I mean, I want to be able to hand them an iPhone. They'll be like, how is this powered? Magic? I'm like, yes, it's powered by gremlins. To make something cool with it. Be like, okay, when I do this, it should do blah. You know, and I wanted a developer to go, how the hell am I supposed to? I'm like, do it. Like, I want that, right? Because that's the thing, is when you have a designer and a developer in the same space, a lot of the time they'll be like, oh, I should do that. But then I'll have these problems. And I just won't do it that way. You know, like, you get that, and then sometimes you get limited design. It's actually really fun sometimes when you have a designer come up to you, like Brian Bell, who will give you a design, and you're just like, please, no. it's like, well, that's just how it should be made. Anything else sucks, and you're like, oh, all right. And then you actually make it, and you're like, all right, you got a good point. And then on the same time, I think that, you know, something that, you know, for instance, Nate came up with in terms of technology, you can hand over to an artist, and they will scratch their heads with trying to figure out exactly what the heck to do with it. And I think that we're going to be constantly in that stream of give and take, absolutely. And also to agree with Nate is that it's very easy for a developer now to kind of make something pretty extraordinary based off of what we have with the iPhone and just multi-touch. Multi-touch seems to be just kind of this land of gold, and you know, I made a gold Velociraptor, awesome. You know, I made a gold hat, cool. It doesn't really matter because it's all gold. So I mean, you know, right now we're in that golden age where almost anything, you know, you do is going to have a pretty cool effect for the most part. You know, yeah, we're going to leave the golden age pretty soon. No one's going to be caring about your golden hat or Velociraptor. That's fine, because until then, it's pretty cool looking.
The metaphor I like for design versus engineering, you know, imagine that you're going on a road trip and you are trying to think about where you're going to go on this road trip, and you're thinking about how long it's going to take you to get to various destinations and what you're going to see and where you're going to go and how you're going to get there and the routes you're going to take. And you can all kind of sit around and envision what you're going to do. And then, of course, actually doing it, you know, the better your plan is, of course, the better you're gonna do. But the plan is just the plan. You're gonna have to deal with the fact that a road is closed, or you know, the park is not open on that day, or your car breaks down, or you know, any of a number of other problems that come up along the way. And when we envision the trip that we're going to take, when we envision the destination that we're trying to get to, that is design. And when we actually implement that, when we actually get in the car and start driving, that is engineering. They're obviously related concepts. They're two sides of the same coin, and one cannot, or at least should not, exist without the other. But then when we talk about designers and engineers, we're really talking about two things. I mean, we're talking about design and engineering, which certainly we should all be versed in both. But we're also talking about a certain kind of technician. We're talking about the user of a piece of software called Photoshop and the user of a piece of software called Xcode. And the software is sufficiently complicated that you can spend your entire life in it and only master some percentage of it. And so, like, I am really heavily against the idea of the perfect developer who's 50% the world's best designer and 50% the world's best engineer. Because you're just 50% of a designer and 50% of an engineer. Your product deserves both. Not only that, but having only one person working on a project, it does not make the project stronger, it only makes the project weaker. So even if I know exactly what I want to build, I'm still going to bring on a designer. Not only because they're better at using Photoshop than I am, and not for lack of experience. I've been using Photoshop since 1990 when it first came out, but I just don't spend my whole life in Photoshop obsessing over it the way that I do with Xcode. Right? Similarly, they might know a little Xcode, but you know, they're too busy dicking with Photoshop to really learn that much about it. I often describe my job as porting things to Objective-C from Photoshop. You know, I hate it when designers ask me, what are we building? Because I'm like, I don't know, you tell me. That's a designer question. How do we build it? That's the question that I'll answer. But what are we building, you tell me. You know, when we go back and forth, the designers and the engineers, and we debate what it is that we're going to build and whether it's going to be too hard or whether it's a good experience, you know, that's that design aspect of it. You know, and then when we actually start building it, and then you go back to the designer and you say, I'm afraid that the color you've given me is physically impossible to recreate, what color should we use instead, then that's, you know, then that's going back to the design aspect of it, and there's always a little bit of back and forth. I don't actually remember what the original question was, but it had something to do about engineering and design, and so did the answer, so I think that's a match.
I think it's safe to say that every Wozniak needs a job, you know, and I come from a background also of video production, and I can tell you that we used to have, I went to film school during the peak of the indie film years, and I see a lot of analogs in independent app development and independent filmmaking, and we always would debate the auteur theory. You know, is there an auteur? Well, you know what? It's kind of, but it's also kind of bullshit, because there's not just one guy out there with his camera doing everything. You know, you have a vision, a creative vision, and then you have to have technicians who go through and know, hey, that road is closed this time of day, we can't shoot during then, you know. And so, yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is the takeaway from that for you guys who consider yourselves more developers than designers is absolutely talk to designers. And I think the interaction design thing is an important point too, because you know, you're using devices, even the iPad, which is more computer maybe than the iPhone, but it's used in a context that you would not normally use a computer in necessarily. I mean, I'm sure anyone in here has probably curled up in bed with their computer, but the average person, the people who are actually paying for your apps, is more likely to curl up and read iBooks in their bed on their iPad. And there's a good reason why Apple, which it would take them, what, 2 clicks to port iBooks over to the Mac? There's a reason why it's not on the Mac, because that's not where you curl up with a book, you know, on your Mac. It's a different use case. So that's the kind of thing I think that a good designer can bring to that, is that mindset of the user, and, you know, separate yourself a little bit from that. Going on with this theme of what is it that you guys as developers might be able to supplement through working with other people, I'm curious on the business side of things. Well, this is a very narrow question, but what is one thing that you would never, as a developer, allow yourself to do in terms of the business side of things? Not design, but, you know, making sure that you're getting paid, making sure that everything is functional and you're not going to go to jail for tax fraud and that sort of thing.
What would I not do on the business side of things? I mean, I guess my short answer is I wouldn't build something that has no intent of sustaining itself. In a nutshell, building something where the plan is, you really have to go about it in one or two ways. Either build something small, but charge a lot for it, and be happy being a niche and serve a small customer base, but charge accordingly. Or go for broke and go for scale and change the world with a huge impact, something that's devilishly simple. And you'll often kind of find that niche software tends to be very complicated because it has to do a lot of functionality. that services that niche really well. And you'll find the software that tends to have mass market success tends to be very simple, tends to have a very broad appeal. So I mean, for me, that would be the one thing that I wouldn't bother. I don't really like to go after ideas I feel like they don't have legs, because there's plenty of those things to do. Some people are perfectly fine doing that. There's nothing wrong with that. But from the business side, that's probably not what I would do. I would also say that you shouldn't let, within reason, you shouldn't let the current, what you think are laws stop you from doing something that you think might change the world. And I mean that from, don't do a money laundering app. But, you know, if the laws say you can't swipe credit cards in an aggregated way, don't, you know, just ignore it a little bit and try to make it work if you think like it can make a big impact. That's a good example. So don't let lawyers hold you back if what you're trying to do is something that might be patented, crap like that. You'd be surprised that that's sort of stuff you really should ignore.
I would say this is kind of outside of the whole business thing, because there are two reasons you would make an app or make software in general. Number one is that you like to do it and you want to make something that you want to be made that you think is awesome. The other one is you want to earn a paycheck, pay the bills. And I would say, as a recommendation, never stop making the thing that you want to make, even if it's not while you're working. If you stop doing software for fun, software will stop being fun, and you'll start to hate it, and you'll want to do something else. And so that's my recommendation. Keep having fun with programming, even if you're not being paid to do it.
Biz dev and promotion. You can have a really good product, you can have a fantastic feature set, and you will be surprised that you'll be like, I can sell this for $4.99. You sure can. I could sell this for $24.99. Absolutely. Or you could do this, you know, thing that you never thought of before because you know, don't have an MBA kind of thing. And kind of thing, jeez. Anyways, the biz dev and understanding where a good revenue stream is something that a lot of developers don't have because they're so focused on the product. And in terms of promotion, absolutely a developer or an indie developer can promote a product. There are a lot of ways to do it. Perhaps you could read some of these ways in a book called Pitch Perfect by Eric Zadoun and Stephen Sand that just came out. It's actually a really good book, instant plug. I think though that promotion is a way of communicating to the user that we don't understand sometimes. That we, as designers and developers, try and think of a way to make the user's life easier, or try to make them, you know, feel like, well, of course it was, you know, made this way. How else would it have been made? But there's a reason that we have a lot of people out there who do promotion and try to explain and sell the product in a unique way to the user, because most of us don't really know how to talk to the user. We just know how to make them happy. So those are two things I would definitely consider for any indie developer, is to even just, you know, find a way to make a good contact who understands promotion and business development and just pass things by them.
So despite knowing better, I continue to make games. And one of the fundamental rules of game making, of toy making in general, is that, you know, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to choose between realism and fun, you have to go for fun. Like, you must never sacrifice fun for realism. That is a fundament of game making. Well, I think that's also true of app making, right? There's fun and there's realism. Like they said, if you stop making software for fun, then it stops becoming fun. But fun is not the only reason why we make software. I mean, fun is one of the reasons why we make software, and it should definitely be fun. But at the same time, you know, like I just talked about for an hour, like we make software because we believe in something. you know, because there's something that's inside of us that means more to us than everything that we're sacrificing in order to make our dent in the universe. And the realism side of that is how are you going to pay the bills? How are you going to make money with this? You know, I mean, like with Appsterdam, that's what everybody always asks us. Like, how are you going to make money with this? And it's like, who gives a shit? It's something that needs to exist, right? It needs to exist more than it needs to make money. And we'll figure the money stuff out. And I mean, the world, especially in the world of games, oh my God, recently, it's like the world is filled with examples of games who have sacrificed in the name of business. And like the way the games have been going, that just seems to be the trend. It's like all of a sudden, the people who make games, all the game designers were fired, and all of the MBAs were hired and stuck in the game designers' offices, and like all of the game design seems to be business driven, and not driven by anything else, even fun. And that to me is like when I think about the company that I want to build, you know, I not only look at the positive examples, like Pixar, I look at the negative examples, like Zynga. Yeah.
They're right across the
street. No, they're right across the street. And by the way, like, when I first get back to San Francisco, the first thing I see is that Zynga now has a huge fucking building. That's depressing to me. I would love nothing more than to put them out of business by doing nothing more than showing people that actually games don't have to suck.
And just I really want to back up Kyle's comment on marketing and promotion, because one of the things that we found with Square is that people really love what we do, but they just don't even know it exists. And by far, when you show people this little glimpse of the future, their eyes just light up. And if you have something great and people like it, you really have to get the word out there. That's probably one of the hardest things, because we all kind of live in a tech bubble, and we don't think about the fact that we know about all the cool apps that are coming out, and our friends recommend it all the time. Average people still don't really do that. So that's one thing I really want to say. Promotion is huge.
How many people in here use Square or have used Square? Yeah, that's what I thought. We use it all the time. I use it all the time personally. And I think also the thing about realism over fun, I think that's an important thing too, because again, we talk about interaction design, we talk about designing apps. You guys have to put yourselves in the mind of the user, and what maybe makes sense to you might not make sense to most normal humans out there. I run into this all the time with Erica, because she's brilliant with code, but sometimes she just doesn't think like a human being, a normal human, normies as I call them. And and so I think that's important. I had an idea for a Sea Monkey app, and we actually got to the point where we were going to license it and everything, but my idea was way too realistic. Everything was real time, which is the most boring crap ever. You can sit there and watch your iPhone for like 48 hours to watch these things before you can see them. That's stupid. Which is why it's not on the store. Okay, so real quick, accountant or lawyer, which is more important? What do you think? Accountant? Accountant?
Lawyer.
Lawyer? I gotta say accountant.
Accountant, okay. All right. Well, there you go. If you can find accountant lawyer, it's like finding developer, designer. No.
I had an accountant lawyer. It doesn't work because they bill it at different rates.
Oh, jeez. All right, billing at different. That's lame. All right, so we're gonna wrap up here in just a minute. I do want to have time for questions, but I want to ask you guys also. You know, you were there at the beginning pretty much, and you guys all have backgrounds before this, and so I'm interested in, especially for these folks, what are some of the most important business lessons that you learned throughout this journey, and what are the things that you're seeing that these guys can take away and really apply to their business going forward?
I mean, everybody always says this, but it's very, very true. Fail fast. You know, if something, just try crazy ideas if it's what you want to build. If it doesn't work out, that's fine. Learn from it and move on to the next thing. Don't make the same mistake twice.
Even if you want to concentrate on making cool stuff, you really need to make sure you're surrounded by people who know business. Because if you aren't, things sort of fall apart pretty quickly.
Try your best in the very beginning to make as much use of the resources you have. The best analogy I have for this is probably the nerdiest one I can think of, is I call it my StarCraft theory. In the very beginning of StarCraft, there's actually a good mathematics, there's something you can read online, it shows the math of StarCraft. Thank you. The importance of Vespene gas and minerals in StarCraft is actually valued very high in the beginning, and towards the end, the actual value of it goes down frequently as time goes on. Towards the end of a StarCraft match, who cares if you have 1,000 or 55,000? But you know, it doesn't really matter because everyone else is beating your butt. In the beginning of starting a company or beginning of starting a project, your resources and your time and your money are extremely valuable, and make sure that they are spent, painstakingly carefully, because that really has a fantastic, fantastic recourse in how you do later on in the future.
There are two types of things in the world. There are the things that are going to help you get to the place where you need to get, and there are the things that you're ready to burn and sacrifice to achieving that goal. And it's a very difficult thing to do sometimes. You want to be nice. You want to be cool. You want to be chill. But if you're going to change the world, you're going to have to break some hearts. You're going to have to tell some people some things that they don't want to hear. You're going to have to hear some things that you don't want to hear. It's not going to be pleasant. You might make money, but making money is it's a secondary issue. Nobody gets rich because they set out to get rich. People get rich because they set out to change the world. And if you ask people at the end of their lives, whether it was the money or it was the change that meant the most, it's not the money. Money is shit.
Yeah, people all the time ask me, when I tell them what I do, they ask me, like, how does Apple sell how does Apple do so well? They're doing so well now, whatnot. And of course, I was there. My first Apple was an Apple II, bought in 1978 in a bike shop. They didn't have computer stores then. And now they have Apple stores. And I truly never thought I would live to see Apple stores owned by Apple. That's phenomenal to me. And I tell them, I was like, there's, people say, oh, they've got great marketing, they've got this, they've got that. I'm like, at the end of the day, if their products were shit, that would be reflected in the sales. And BlackBerry's living by that right now. If you don't create a continually better product, if you don't serve the needs of your users, then yeah, you're really screwed. And I think that's important information for everybody is, listen to the users who take the time to actually send you information, not necessarily App Store reviews. Those are nice, but, they're not always so nice and they're not always so informative. But really, the people who reach out to you and especially seek you out via email, they want to help you, even if they're assholes about it. Because I was an inveterate asshole for years and sent the most horrific bug reports to Apple ever every time something would crash. And I apologize to anyone at Apple who ever read any of that shit that I sent. But yeah, so I think that's a good point, and I want to thank all of you guys for being here. I wanted to open it up for questions for any of you guys. If anybody has anything you would, illustrious panel.
Questions about Tapulous, for example.
Yes, all right. Why don't we talk about Tapulous, actually? That's what this is supposed to be about, really. We kind of got off track there. I'm sorry. I'm a bad moderator for that. But what was your favorite part about Tapulous?
Honestly, getting to work with Mike. He was the reason I came there. His reputation preceded him, and I wanted the chance to work on iPhone software with somebody who cared about design. It was the chance to work at a startup on Mac stuff, which, when the iPhone was first starting out, did not exist. Like that was a new thing. If you wrote Mac software, you were either an indie with one dude in the basement, or you were at some big corp who had to support Mac to, complete a feature checklist. So when the iPhone came out and you could suddenly work at a startup and do Mac stuff, that changed my life. It was great.
I would say that the biggest thing about working at Tapulous was that prior to working with Tapulous, I didn't have anyone I talked to about coding. Like, coding was a completely solitary experience for me. I didn't talk with people about it. And actually working with other coders, it was just great to actually have a community and people to talk to about it and learn things from them, because they actually knew more than I did. So it was that definitely my favorite part.
My favorite part of Tapulous was the ridiculous expectations. It's true. I mean, and you think only ridiculous because that's how you think at the time. When my first task with Tapulous was to work on Tap Tap Dance, which was a complete rewrite. The game engine, the menu system, the feature list, all of it, basically we rewrote Tap Tap Revenge in 6 weeks. Ow. You know, that was I remember hearing people, the heads saying that. They're like, yeah, we need to have this done by then. I'm like, oh, okay, sure, why not? Like, I got nothing left to lose. You know, like I didn't believe it. You know, I honestly thought that was just a ridiculous expectation. And sure enough, you know, less than 2 months later-ish, we're releasing it, and I was like, wow, we actually did it. You know, and it sounds like a negative thing, but it really isn't. The reality is having an insane goal to reach, and then being able to look back and go, not only did I do that, but, you know, I'm really proud that I was able to.
You know, it was the first company that I started as like the first real company. I mean, not just some lemonade stand bullshit from being a kid, but a real company, you know, a real Silicon Valley startup. But it was just like any other job, in the sense that what made the job awesome or terrible at the end of the day was the people. Like, the best parts of that job was being able to work with some of the people that I got to work with, and the worst parts of that job were having to work with some of the people I had to work with. And I mean, the lesson from that, you know, that I've really taken with me is, you know, it's all about the people. I'm like, all of the effort that I put into my current company is put into building the team and protecting the team and making sure that the team members are, you know, are a good fit and that everyone gets along, and, you know, making sure that it's like, you know, it doesn't really matter the people on the team. It doesn't matter what they're into or what drugs they take or what religion they believe. It just matters that they're compatible with each other, and that they're, not even that they get along, but that they're able to produce, that they're able to drive each other to great heights.
That seems to be a common theme, both the hiring of good people and setting impossible goals, that I've noticed. The really successful companies, they do both of those things. And I'm curious actually about the human factor here. With all of you, how do you find great people?
You don't ever compromise. If there's one thing that I've learned at Square when we've been hiring great people is it's better to pass on somebody you have doubts on, and then you'll be not sure. You'll be like, man, I just wasn't sure if that guy, he might have been good, but we let him, you know, go instead of actually hiring him. And then you'll stumble on that person who just blows you away, and then you knew you made the right choice. And if there's one thing that will tank a great company faster than anything else, you can watch the rise and fall of great companies, and it always falls when the great people start leaving and stop coming to the company. So I mean, and kind of additionally, you're not going to be able to hire the best people if you aren't already yourself. And maybe that sounds kind of elitist, but it's true. Like, great people want to work with great people, and if you're not great, they're not going to want to work with you because they're going to feel like you're holding them back. So that's kind of one of the precursors to it, honestly.
I have not been successful at finding great people, so I don't know what it really means. The great people have all found me, so that's the thing. Okay, I haven't looked, but I mean, I've got these people sitting next to me, and that's not. I mean, they've got the techniques. It's not me, so I have no comment on it.
You find the people who don't need you. You find the people who are doing just fine on their own, and have their own dreams and ambitions, and then you hunt them down as hard as you possibly can. It took me so long to get Nate to join Monster Costume. It took me the better part of 6 months of talking to Nate off and on for about every other week, then every other day, and it was finally this moment of like, Nate, we can do this, come on, and Nate was like, okay, and it wasn't the fact that Nate didn't want to do it or that he thought I wasn't a good person. I don't know, maybe I just heard some news. I think though it was more of a situation where he was capable of doing things on his own, and it's really hard for people to realize that when you have a good independent spirit like that, that sometimes having multiple of them that have the same goal can actually produce something great. And once you find people like that, that you know that you can work with, that don't need you to do things on their own and to do good things, then you really need to hunt those people down and actually show them, that you can actually do great things together.
For me, when I'm looking at people, for one thing, I don't think I've ever hired anybody really for their technical acumen. I've worked with people for their technical acumen because I'm looking for somebody to, I need a GL guy, he has to be good at GL, But when I'm really hiring people to work on the team, what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for their passion and their dedication to what it is that we're doing. More than their independence, more than their techniques, more than anything. What I'm interested in is, do these people have the same sort of driving insanity inside of them that I have and the rest of the team has? Because if they're not all driven in the same way, then they're not going to do the work, they're not going to be there, they're not going to achieve the kind of synergy that we're going to need them to achieve. Like the company that I build now, everyone who works at that company, sincerely believes that we as a species are fucked if we do not radically increase the amount of knowledge that is contained in our species. And we all truly believe that, as a kind of religious belief, and it drives everything about the company, every decision that we make. And as long as everybody in the company believes that, then all of the things that we need to do become very simple. Because when it becomes a question of, for example, are we going to demo at WWDC? Are we ready for it? It's not a question of ego, it's not a question of how hard we've worked, it's not a question of our desire to demo, it's a question of, is this going to serve the purpose that we're trying to serve? And if not everybody is on the same page with that, that's just not going to work. We all have to be driven by that same thing. It's that passion, it's that drive, it's that internal X factor. That's what I'm always looking for. What I want to know when I talk to somebody is, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for the money? And if you're doing this for the money, I just don't want to work with you. Nothing against you per se. It's just that in my experience, the people who are doing this for the money are not going to survive the stuff that we're going to do, because there are way easier ways to make money than making a bunch of insane world-changing bullshit. Honestly, they're really gambling, for example, much easier, much faster. So yeah, it's all about the drive. It's all about whether they're going to survive. Because getting to the other end of the development process, you develop a closeness to the people that you've worked with. It rivals the closeness between a married couple. It really is. It's that level of intimacy, where you're able to be honest with each other in a way that you don't get from other people. Where you're not expected to say please and thank you, where you're not expected to consider the other one's feelings, where the only thing that you're really there to do, the only promise that you have is to make each other better.
The hunger. You gotta have the hunger, that's right. All right, any questions? We got a few minutes for questions. Yeah?
Along the lines of working with people, I'm sure by this point most of you or all of you have worked with or tried to find partners. Can you give your perspective on finding partners to work with, and then the relationship of working with a partner, and working through the difficult times of that and the good times?
this one. Find a partner who will contribute just as much as you. Don't ever partner with somebody who's like, I'll handle just the business stuff and you can write all the code. Run screaming. You want to find a partner who is going to contribute just as much as you. He'll be writing code right alongside you. He'll either be designing the app with you, something like that. But if the other partner is dead weight, in the sense that they are providing that sort of ephemeral services, that is not a good person to work with. The co-founders very early on in the company should be as lean and as functional as possible, because you will be doing next to everything.
I don't have any useful advice on the subject.
Oh, that's an easy one to follow up then. That's a really tough question. That really is. That's not an easy question. I've been very fortunate to know a lot of people who, you know, I'm like, I have a crazy idea. And they're like, oh, or they come to me and say, you know, I have a crazy idea. And then we high five and do it. I mean, if you know, okay, there you go, there's my answer. Find that. Find it where it's just that easy. Find it where it's just that effortless to communicate with someone. Where you don't have to be like, okay, look, for the 40th time, when they click on the button, and they can take it to the screen now. Just you know, find it where you just understand each other and you click and you move, right? And it's not always, and even if you have that, even if you have you know, a connection with someone that really makes sense and, you know, it's very easy to do, that doesn't always necessarily mean it's the right time, right? Because even when you have that, there are certain times when you're just like, I want to be able to do this, but I can't do it right now. So it's to say the right partner. I mean, dude, you might as well be talking about women. You really, seriously, you might as well be talking about dating at this point.
Just as much drama.
Yeah, it's just as much drama. It really is. I feel sometimes like I'm, you know. I think my point's been made. You know, yeah.
I agree with these guys. I mean, I think that when you're talking about finding a business partner, it's the same thing as finding a partner in life. I think there's two things that you really need to look for, aside from just the basic, you know, do you get along with each other? Do you like each other okay? Can you communicate with each other in a way where communication actually happens and you're not just talking through each other? You know, can you connect with each other on that level? But ultimately, I think that there are really two things. The first one is, you know, I think that there are two types of people in the world. And of course, you can split people into two types of people in a million different ways. But one of those ways, you know, there are the people in your life who make you better. And then there's everybody else. It's not enough to really like somebody. If you're going to be a partner with somebody, you have to make them better than they were before, and they have to make you better than you were before, and you have to constantly be, if you'll pardon this unexpected metaphor, grinding up against each other. You know, like two plates, right? You know, always making each other smoother and better and sharper. The other thing is that you really have to believe in the same shit. I mean, I know I just said that, but I'm going to say it again. And this is the Tapulous panel. And Tapulous is a company that is glorious and tragic at the same time. And I think if you really tried to track down the tragedy of Tapulous, I think what you'll find is that Tapulous was and has always been two companies. And if you even look at all the newspaper articles from when the company started, and you see the co-founders speaking about two completely different companies. And it was really, it was inevitable that that would eventually be torn apart, because you cannot have two companies in the same company. It just doesn't work.
And I can tell you that from recruiting a lot of bloggers, I mean, we've had some incredible people, and we joke around that we're kind of the farm team. We've got Scott McNulty, Christina Warren, and there's a whole bunch of Corey Bolton. I mean, a bunch of people that we discovered and then went on to go do writing gigs at places that pay a lot better. And more power to them. They want to do that as a career. That's the thing to do. And but I think that one thing that would help in terms of the practical sense of actually finding people is it's serendipity, but you have to increase your chances for that serendipitous moment. And so attending things like this, being active on forums, talking to people, that's the only way that it can happen. Any other questions? Yeah.
You guys talk a lot about the early days. It's like on the other side of the coin, what's next? What technologies you guys are saying about? What should we look at? As developers that want to grow, what's the next thing we should look at?
You should start considering if your software would be applicable for television. I started thinking about that. Seriously though, if you make games right now, you should be very excited about hopefully what's coming in the next few months. I mean, the rumors are at the point of absurdity, like we know it's coming, we don't know when or what, but the basic premise is going to be we could probably do some pretty exciting things with shared gaming experiences on a television, especially with the mobile devices we have. So that'd be cool. Other than that, going forward, you know, I think the same formula of finding some niche that's, or finding something that just hasn't been done well yet, and just doing it well. There's so many businesses out there that are just waiting to be revolutionized by somebody coming in and cleaning it up and ripping everything apart and putting it back together in a much nicer, neater, more usable way. That would probably never end because that's how everything gets better. Yeah.
As a pragmatist, I don't really like to sort of cast into the future and try and figure out what's going to be the next thing. My advice personally is learn as much as you can about everything that is currently established, and even weirder technologies, things that aren't really in the mainstream now. Get all of that into your head, spend a couple hours on anything, and all of that stuff will be sitting in your brain, gaining understanding as it's just there. And when the next thing comes out, it'll latch onto something that you learned in the past, and you'll have a head start learning that new thing as soon as it catches on. And that's really all the advice I can give.
It's worked really well for Monster Costume to have Nate be the pragmatist, because on the other side of the coin, I am not. When I saw AirPlay being demoed for the first time, and I saw the two screens, it was like Nintendo DS, but like, you know, actually cool this time. I flipped out. Like, I love that. And if you look at Bartleby's Book of Buttons, which is an interactive children's book, its use of AirPlay was very much like me just going to town on it. I cannot even begin to describe how important the concept of AirPlay is, and how much that is going to change, radically change how software applications are going to be made in the next 4 years.
You know, when this thing first started, it was just a big land grab. You know, I mean, there was all of this stuff that was eventually going to get done, all of these things that needed to be ported over to the new platform. There were all of these kind of obvious ideas that were eventually going to be built and sold. And, you know, it's been like 4 years, and I think that that's largely been fulfilled. I mean, we've seen, you know, we've seen what was once the empty container of the iOS platform really kind of fill up with quite some apps. And it gets harder and harder to really come up with that thing that already exists except for the iPhone, except for the iPad, except for iOS. You know, there's less and less stuff that we can just port over. And so what we find then is people start kind of doing the same stuff over and over and over again. You know, every idea I hear almost without fail falls into the category of it's like blank with blank. You know, it's like some combination of two things that already exist, basically. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of Norwegians just a couple days ago, and they flew down from Norway to ask me this question, basically, of what does the future hold? And their interpretation of the ecosystem, looking at everything, is that it seems like everything that was going to be built for this platform has been built for this platform. So does this mean that the age of apps is coming to an end? And I'm like, no, I think of it more like we had the Big Bang, and And there was this inflationary period when we went from having an empty universe to a universe filled with matter. And then things started to get interesting. And, you know, the matter went from being this kind of Gaussian distribution of predictable stuff to being something that was kind of clumpy and weird and everything that we've come to know and love about the universe that we live in. And I think that's where our ecosystem is. Yes, the obvious stuff is done, but that means that now it's time for the crazy stuff. Now it's time to not just say, so we had a children's book and it was on paper and that was great, and now we have the children's book and it's on e-paper and it's equally great. Now is the time to look at it and say, okay, you had a kid's book and it was on paper and it was nice. Then we moved it to the iPad and it was about 80% as good as it was on paper. How do we turn that around and how do we make it twice as good on the iPad as it was on paper, right? And when you look at something like Bartley's Book of Buttons, when you look at the work that these guys are doing, like that's the beginning of it, right? It's taking it beyond just trying to recreate what existed in the physical world and actually creating an experience that is better than the physical world, an experience that takes advantage of this primitive nanotechnology that is iOS. Something that is not just a recreation of what came before, but something that is truly a new paradigm. And that's what I think the future is. And so I'm all about thinking about the future because I don't see it as guessing, I don't see it as prognostication, I see it as thinking about what we're going to build next.
And on that note, any other questions? About out of time here? All right. Thank you, Tristan, Nate, Kyle, Mike, everybody here. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it.